The year is 1812. We have been told the story of Napoleon's defeat in Russia 1,000 times. We are taught that the Great Retreat was a battle against the elements, a story of fire, ice, and the sheer brutality of the Russian winter. But what if the history books have been missing the real killer? For over 2 centuries, we believed the Grande Armée was destroyed by the sword and the snow. But in the last few months, a team of scientists and forensic archaeologists has uncovered a new war. They didn't find it in the archives or on the battlefield. They found it in the teeth of the dead. Welcome to the DNA War, the forensic investigation that is officially rewriting the end of Napoleon's empire. To understand this new discovery, we have to go back to a mass grave in Vilnius, Lithuania. In the winter of 1812, as the remnants of Napoleon's 600,000-man army staggered out of Russia, Vilnius became a graveyard. Thousands of soldiers, exhausted and broken, simply lay down in the streets and died. Their bodies were piled into massive trenches and forgotten for centuries. It wasn't until modern construction crews uncovered these pits that the true forensic work could begin. At first, historians pointed to the obvious: starvation and hypothermia. The skeletons showed signs of extreme malnutrition. But there was a mystery. Why were so many young, healthy soldiers dying before the winter even hit its peak? This is where the DNA war begins. Using a process called advanced genetic sequencing, researchers from the Institut Pasteur and other elite labs have been extracting DNA from the dental pulp of these fallen soldiers. Teeth are like biological time capsules. They protect the DNA of the blood that was circulating in the soldier's body at the moment of their death. And what they found in 2025 and 2026 has sent shockwaves through the historical community. For decades, we suspected typhus was the main culprit, but the DNA tells a much more complex and terrifying story. The scientists didn't just find one killer. They found a cocktail of invisible assassins. The genetic markers revealed the presence of Salmonella enterica, the bacterium responsible for paratyphoid fever. They also found Borrelia recurrentis, a brutal pathogen that causes louse-borne relapsing fever. This is a new war because it proves that the Grande Armée wasn't just retreating from the Russians. They were a walking biological disaster. These diseases are spread by body lice, the tiny, inescapable parasites that lived in the seams of the soldiers' wool uniforms. Because the soldiers were huddled together for warmth, the lice traveled from man to man, carrying a death sentence that no musket could match. Imagine being a soldier in 1812. You haven't changed your clothes in months. You are sleeping in a crowded barn with 50 other men to stay alive. The lice are everywhere. Suddenly, you are hit with cycles of high fever, bone-shaking chills, and muscle pain so intense you can't hold your rifle. This is what the DNA is showing us. The army was losing its strength long before they reached Moscow. The forensic evidence suggests that by the time Napoleon reached the Battle of Borodino, a massive percentage of his men were already the walking dead, their immune systems shattered by paratyphoid and relapsing fever. But the DNA war goes even deeper than the soldiers in the trenches. It has finally moved to the emperor himself. For years, the world debated if Napoleon was murdered with arsenic. You've seen the documentaries claiming his hair contained toxic levels of the poison. But in this new era of 2026 forensics, scientists have used neutron activation and comparative DNA analysis on samples of Napoleon's hair from his youth, his exile, and his deathbed. The results are conclusive. The arsenic was there, But it wasn't a murder. It was everywhere in the 19th century, in the wallpaper, the hair tonics, and even the medicine. The DNA and the chemical mapping show that the levels remained consistent throughout his life. He wasn't assassinated by a secret dose. He was living in a toxic world. So, what does this DNA war tell us about history? It tells us that Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who mastered the art of war, was ultimately defeated by an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't shoot, and couldn't outmaneuver. The Russian winter was the finishing blow, but the bacteria and the lice had already won the war. The Grande Armée didn't just collapse because of a tactical error or cold snap. It collapsed because it was a biological furnace, consumed by paratyphoid and relapsing fever. When we look at the ruins of Moscow, or the Golden Dome of Les Invalides today, we are looking at the remnants of a man who tried to conquer the world. But the new forensic science reminds us of the fragility of that power. Even the greatest empire in history can be brought to its knees by a microscopic strand of DNA. As we continue to dig into the mass graves of the past, we are finding that history isn't just written by the winners. It's written in the genetic code of the victims. The DNA war has only just begun, and it is proving that the greatest mysteries of the past are still hidden right under our feet, waiting for the science of the future to set them free. We have opened the grave, we have sequenced the teeth, and we have found the invisible army of lice and typhus that actually defeated Napoleon. But that was just the beginning of the DNA war. What happens now that we have the proof? Why are history departments around the world in a full-blown crisis over these microscopic genetic markers? Because the forensic evidence isn't just telling us how the soldiers died, it's telling us why we have been telling the wrong story for 2 centuries. Welcome to Part 2 of the DNA War. This is the moment when science clashes directly with national myths and professional egos. The result is a historical landscape that looks absolutely nothing like what you were taught in school. Think about the traditional narrative of Waterloo. We are told it was a battle of geniuses, Wellington's defensive masterclass versus Napoleon's final flash of brilliance. But the DNA war has crossed the battlefield to 1815. In 2025 and 2026, forensic teams have begun sequencing remains from the infamous Waterloo bones, which were long thought lost. And what they are finding is shattering the heroic myth. The DNA is revealing that a shocking number of these soldiers were not prime, healthy men. They were the skeletal survivors of the 1812 disaster, their bodies already ravaged by the relapsing fever and paratyphoid we identified in Part 1. We are looking at an army that was physically compromised before the first cannon fired. The DNA proves Napoleon was commanding a force that was hollowed out by disease. This forces us to ask, was Waterloo lost because of a tactical error, or because his men were too biologically broken to hold the line? This is why traditional historians are furious. For 200 years, history has been a story about choices, the decisions of great men on white horses. But the DNA war says that the biggest decider of all was a louse, a bacterium, and a genetic vulnerability. Historians feel that science is erasing the human element of history, replacing genius and courage with statistics and pathogens. But the forensic scientists argue they are finally telling the whole story, the story of the millions of ordinary soldiers who didn't get a say in the strategy, whose lives were dictated by biology rather than bravery. It's a battle over who gets to define the past. Are we studying the soul of an empire, or are we studying the health of a population? This clash isn't just about academic ego. It's about a new kind of historical forecasting. For the first time in 2026, we can take the DNA profile of a historical population and model how a war would likely play out, factoring in disease vulnerability and immunity. We are moving from studying history to simulating it. This means the future of history isn't just about looking at documents, it's about understanding genomics, climate, and the complex ways that disease shapes human destiny. The DNA war has shown us that the real history of Napoleon's empire was never written on paper. It was written in the teeth of his dead soldiers, waiting for a science that didn't yet exist to finally set the record straight. The past is being decoded, and it will never be the same again.